Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're hard at work on our latest book, JFK and RFK's Battle Against Zionist Extremism. And we're hoping that book comes out this month in July. It's looking good, and it's a very important book. Somehow, the fact that both John and Robert Kennedy were wise to and in opposition to the extremism of the Zionists, and they were actually actively during the John F. Kennedy administration fighting them, has been erased by history. Well, we're going to unerase it with our book. And please watch for it. Please support it. Please buy it. It's there is no other book like it, and it's kind of shocking that nobody else got around to writing this important history. Anyway, let me show you a picture. On the left, we have Marshall Applewhite, who you may remember as the cult leader of the Hale Bopp uh, cult. They were expecting that some kind of a comet was going to come to Earth, and they were going to. Well, that was the official story. I think the real story is something completely different. But that's the guy on the left. So if you're of a certain age, you were an adult when that happened, and you probably recognize this guy's face. On the right, you have our current president, completely out of it. But that's not news to us. Shocking that it's news to the mainstream news media, which has been denying this now for years. I mean, I was shocked when he ran for president. I was shocked when he was nominated. Uh, the whole thing's shocking. But this is not a first. This is not a first. And we're going to go through history. We're going to go backwards. Um, most of our presidents have had something wrong with them, but some of them had a lot of things wrong with them. Let's look at Ronald Reagan. Well, of course, he was shot. He had colon cancer, he had skin cancer. He had all kinds of surgeries while he was president. He had pretty significant hearing loss. Uh, but 5 years after leaving office, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Now, the question is, how much of that did he have while he was in office? I'm going to guess probably a lot. And remember who his vice president was? George H.W. Bush. Because of Reagan's health problems, which were ongoing, uh, he delegated a whole lot of responsibility to Vice President Bush and other senior officials. Um, and another guy in his crew, including Dick Cheney, who were actually running the country. All right, who else have we had in the office uh, relatively recently who was pretty impaired? How about Dwight D. Eisenhower? He had a heart attack in the middle of his uh, presidency, a severe one. He had a really serious intestine problem that required surgery and required hospitalization and a period of recovery. And he also had a stroke. And who was his vice president? Well, it was Richard Nixon. And so what did Eisenhower do? He delegated lots and lots of his responsibilities to Richard Nixon. Now, remember, of course, Eisenhower was the guy who, at the end of his term, warned us about the military industrial complex. Well, the military industrial complex took great strides during Eisenhower's administration. And Nixon was responsible for a lot of those advances, so-called advances, including many coups. The CIA got really involved in operating coups around the world, excuse me, while Eisenhower was supposedly president. But again, heart attack, serious surgery needed for something else, having a stroke. Um, that's who was in the White House. All right, let's go back further. How about FDR? Um, FDR was very sick. Uh, I don't think that's I don't think that's news to anybody. He worked hard. He tried hard. but he had all kinds of problems. Polio was just one of them. In his later years, when he was still president, he really deteriorated significantly in his third and fourth terms. He had heart disease, hypertension, uh, and it affected his thinking ability. And there are photographs of him at the famous Yalta Conference in February 1945, where you can see how sick he is. He's covered in a blanket. He does not look well by any stretch of the imagination. And he was supposedly engaged in really serious negotiations with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin about the post-World War II world order. Um, and it was a worry. It was a worry. So here we are in the middle of World War II, and we got a president who's just barely hanging on. All right. Who else have we had in the White House who was not all there? Uh, Woodrow Wilson. Okay. He had a severe stroke in 1919, and it left him paralyzed on his left side, and it really impaired his ability to speak and move. Uh, I'm going to wonder if it also impaired his ability to work and think. Now, we're kind of coming full circle. Wilson was about 100 years ago. And here's what happened during. Now, interestingly enough, as you look at the histories, the historians become more and more frank about how sick these guys were as you go further away from the present time. So when they're talking about Reagan, they're like, yeah, he was pretty good and he was probably okay. And then FDR, excuse me, Eisenhower, they say, well, he was, he had some periods of hospitalization and recovery. And then they get to FDR and they say, yeah, it was pretty bad. Well, when they get to Wilson, all the gloves come off. All right. So I'm going to read here. The extent of his incapacity was kept secret from the public and even many government officials. And who was running the show? His wife. History repeats itself. His wife, Edith Wilson, and his physician, Dr. Cary Grayson, controlled access to the president. And she was basically the de facto gatekeeper, which made her the de facto decision maker. How similar is that to what we're facing today? What's her name? Jill Biden um, runs the country. Really? Really? That's the best we can do, apparently. She literally has to walk him around. Otherwise, he wouldn't know where he is. He'd wander off and or fall down. And yet, as of the time of this recording, which is July 2nd, 2024, he's still intending to be the presidential candidate for the Democrats. All right, so he made very few public appearances, and he was unable to perform many of his presidential duties. His public visibility. This is we're not talking about Biden here. We're talking about Woodrow Wilson. His public visibility was drastically reduced, which contributed to a lack of confidence in his leadership. Sound familiar? 100 years later, we're facing the same situation. Um, Many of his responsibilities were delegated to his cabinet members and advisors, but without clear guidance from the president, decision-making processes became chaotic and inefficient. I would say that's not what's happening under Biden. What's happening under Biden is the various heads of departments are just doing whatever they feel like doing. So it's not really chaotic. It's intentional and measured because you don't have a leader. And so if you're a cabinet uh, head and you have a personal agenda that you want to enforce, the road is clear for you to do anything you want. All right, going back to Wilson's wife, Edith Wilson, uh, the the uh, the term of Woodrow Wilson was often called referred to as the stewardship or the regency of Edith Wilson. All right. Stewardship means you're taking care of somebody that can't take care of themselves. Regency, of course, means you're some kind of royalty. And we really are, and again, 100 years later, 100 plus years later, find ourselves in that situation where an unqualified, unelected person of, in Jill Biden's case, of highly dubious morals, because she clearly is involved in the criminal activities of her family, is the de facto president of the United States because she controls the president of the United States. And Edith Wilson, uh, her job was to review all the communications that came in and out to the president, decide which issues deserve the president's attention, also often made decisions in his name. Uh, and this raised concerns about the constitutional implications. Yeah, I would say. Now, important things were going on while Woodrow Wilson was president. World War I had just ended. And the mess had to be cleaned up. And there was a big treaty being negotiated, and there was the formation of the League of Nations. And whether those things should have gone on or not, or how they went on, ideally is up for question. But clearly, the president was not involved because he was not healthy enough. There was an amendment put in, the 25th Amendment, and it basically says that if there's significant presidential incapacity, he's got to be removed. Well, obviously that wasn't done during FDR, wasn't done during Eisenhower, wasn't done during Reagan, and it's clearly not being done during Biden. So we have a very strange country where you can have somebody too sick to hold down a desk job, uh, in a government back office, posing as the president of the United States with his unelected, unqualified, uh, dishonest wife basically running the show. And I think she wants him to stay president. Believe it or not, Hunter does. And I think the reason for that is pretty simple because if he's not president, they're all going to jail. So we didn't have that under Eisenhower or Reagan or FDR or Wilson. So I guess things aren't an exact repeat of the past, but we absolutely have a very similar case to Wilson, basically unable to function, being run by his wife. And that's supposedly the president of the United States. And again, who's running the show? All the back office people, whatever crazy agendas they have, they're just pushing without limit. And I think they like it that way. I don't think, I think there's a lot of people that like the fact that the so-called president of the United States is completely incapacitated and really should not be doing any work, certainly not work that affects anybody other than himself. But that's the case that we have. So history repeats itself. I don't think anybody else has bothered to give you this history. Maybe somebody has. I haven't seen it. It seems obvious. But again, we've got Woodrow Wilson, we've got FDR, we've got Eisenhower, we've got Reagan, and now we got Joseph Biden. People who do not have the capacity to be president, and yet are not only going to live out their terms. Looks like Biden, at least at this point, and his family intend to run again. So this has been Brass Check, and I hope you enjoyed it. And please share this. And if you are a supporter, thank you very much. You are the person and people who make it possible for us to do this work. And do keep an eye out for our upcoming book, JFK and RFK's Battle Against Zionist Extremism. Again, another very important insight into our current events that no one else is sharing to you.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.